This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of their affiliated organizations.
Welcome back, everybody, to Ready to Connect. I'm Lisa.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Ryan.
So today we're going to dive into a topic that challenges both science and spirituality. It's the intersection between disability, psychic sensitivity, and misdiagnosis. For some, what looks like a disability might actually be a doorway to deeper awareness, a heightened perception that science hasn't fully learned to measure yet. And when we label what we don't understand, we risk silencing something sacred. So today we'll explore both sides of that too, the science and the spirituality part of it. But before we begin, really curious to know, so as we're taping, it's before Christmas, but just want to know how it's been a couple weeks since we've been able to get together. What's been going in your world? So we'll start with you, Ryan. Why not put you on the spot? What's been going on in your life?
Oh, I thought you were gonna go with Heather first.
Mm.
So putting me on the spot. Yeah, not much has really been going on. I've been scanning quarters now, so I've been trying to fill up another booklet of state quarters, so that's been exciting. But what I have noticed too is I have an old soul. I can't help it.
I'm going to say you're not the only one I know that finds scanning quarters to be exciting.
Yeah.
In
Well,
my world, I'm sure there are a lot of people that do, but
yeah.
I think the information you find is exciting. Yeah, I guess.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. Like for instance, there's some quarters I've found that are worth like over $1.60, and so things like that. And now I have a goal that once I fill up my state booklet and my national park state quarters booklet, then I'm gonna go to all these places and like take pictures of it, and while I'm holding up the quarters and like and have it be like a whole road trip. So that's
That
what I've been
sounds
doing.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hey,
yeah.
ready to connect on the road? We'll go with you and hold up those.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it just came to me the other day. I was like, wait a second, I can actually go to these places or, see what the state quarters are about. So, yeah, so that's what I've been doing. It's just something random, but it's been interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. So, I had everyone here for Thanksgiving, and so I had my little grandson in a little high chair. It was so cute, and so that's the biggest thing is my grandson sitting in a high chair,
Wow.
and it's fun.
Ready.
And I think he started food. I go back to babysitting him tomorrow, and I think he started some solid food, so that should be interesting to see. But what I really wanted to share is my husband and I every year we do an advent calendar, and so put in our little. We each take, I have the odd days to open up the drawers and he has the even days. And so we put in the advent calendar things that we're going to, just things that we do together. It doesn't have to be anything large or, sharing hot cocoa and a cookie after dinner together, on a weekday is kind of a nice thing or whatever it might be. And so we've been having a lot of fun with our advent calendar. And over the weekend, we got to go to Weathersfield and I found free, you can ride a horse-drawn carriage through Old Weathersfield. So we did that, and it was a lot of fun. And then we went for what's considered the best cocoa, or one of the best cocos you can get in Connecticut, over at in Weathersfield. There, they make their own marshmallows, and I'm trying to remember. Heirloom Market is a place, and the marshmallow was absolutely fabulous. The cocoa was fine, but the marshmallow makes the cocoa. And then we went to Christmas in the Village here yesterday, uh, Sunday, here in Coventry, which was kind of always a fun thing to do. When you live in a small town, you do the small towny things. So, um, yeah, so yeah, that was a lot of fun. So,
Oh, lots going on. Lots going on. I think the highlight that's been for myself the last couple weekends is during the winter seasons. Newport, Rhode Island has all the mansions decorated for Christmas, and right now there's a series running out of the Rough Point um, mansion where every Saturday night they play live music. and it really sets a tone. Rough Point is one of the mansions that is in the corner of Ocean Drive, so the whole property is lined with all the way around water. And it's really romantic when they lower the lighting and then you just have someone either playing the saxophone or a harp or whatever's going on for the evening. It's really romantic. It really brings in kind of that holiday spirit. And I think it revitalizes some of the mansions, especially Rough Point. Rough Point was owned by the Doris Duke, and so she lived in that mansion until like 1992. So very interestingly, she used that mansion to its full accessibility. And so you go up into her room and her clothes are still hanging there. You can feel kind of her essence still there. And then as you meander down the big staircases into the hall that they're holding the music, um, it's almost like she's there because the energy is so still very much alive. So that's been very lovely to attend and just kind of be around, for getting into the kind of winter spirit,
Yeah.
holiday spirit.
And I know my friend well, all those mansions, that Victorian era, that's just so her, that
It
Gilded Age.
is the Gilded Age.
Uh, if she could have a house that looked exactly like that, she's actually transforming our house little by little tchotchkes, little things that she's putting, even the way she decorates her home, into one of those Victorian era places, and it's really kind of cool to see, even down to the tea that she uses. It's really kind of cool. So,
That's
Which
awesome.
is one that you had bought me, Lisa, so it's
yeah,
fantastic.
I know. Yeah, I have a good time finding things for you. Yeah, yeah, 'cause I like to thrift.
So I love that we're talking about autism and even just individuals having disabilities. I think there is a huge expansion on perception that needs to be out there. There's a lot of people that are labeled disabled and may not be completely disabled due to having maybe some psychic abilities or really understanding like their neurodivergent kind of anatomy and tapping into that energy and frequency. Unfortunately, sometimes individuals um, they don't know how to express it. So it's not always perceived correctly, I guess is the right word, or maybe it's not always recognized that an individual may be having a spiritual experience versus having a quote unquote behavior. In some of the research that I've done, and of course, every piece of research Lisa, Ryan, and I have done, it's not it's an objective. It's not our opinion. We're looking this up because we find that there's a lot of misdiagnosis out there, and a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to an individual or someone with some form of handicap, right? That is misunderstood or maybe even misdiagnosed. So we felt it was important to talk about this. I know Lisa and I don't know about you, Ryan, as a teacher, but like Lisa and I have seen many clients, um, come through the door and they are, I just love this. I know you can't see us, but like I'm looking at Lisa and her little kitty Sully is in the corner of the screen peeking at us. It's so adorable. Sorry, I digress.
We're zooming our podcast today, so all are in our different. And yeah, Sully is next. He's going to start to bite my laptop, but yeah. The idea of doing this podcast with about disabilities and psychic awareness was a topic that you brought up, Ryan. You had an interest in exploring this. Do you want to tell the listeners why this was something that seemed to speak to you to want to kind of investigate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it basically I've just always been intrigued by it. It's just something out of curiosity. I am also a former special ed teacher, so I have worked with students with autism who have been verbal, nonverbal, and I've just always been curious because I feel like there's some even if when they're nonverbal as well, there's so much more going on like within their minds, and it makes me think of just with any disability, if something's lacking, I've always been curious if something else is heightened because of that. Like another sense is heightened because of that. So um, it's just a topic out of curiosity. And I was just curious if there was some type of correlation.
So for me, I mean, growing up, I experienced something. I don't know if you could call impaired vision really a disability or not, because we can wear glasses, which corrects that. But as a child, having, severe visual issues, really poor eyesight, it did heighten that other part of being able to see people's auras.
Hmm.
And, or at least it allowed for that because of the way that the information was coming into the brain, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I can definitely speak to that in particular. Did you have your own experience, something too about something was heightened? Thought you had told me that.
Yeah, yeah. So I was born extremely premature. I was actually born 4 months premature. Had to stay in the hospital for 5 months. Must have been a fun adventure, but I'm glad I don't remember that. But and so because of that, I mean that's why I my eyesight isn't that good. They think it's because of being pumped in with oxygen for so long that it just kind of affected my eyes in that sense. However, I do have very sensitive hearing and I'm attributing it to all of that. And so like even to this day, like if I go to a parade or a concert or whatever, like I have to constantly be wearing earplugs because it just gets to be too loud and it's like it's too sensitive. I can't stand it. So and yeah. So I kind of found that interesting and
Is that heightened hearing? Are you clairaudient? I'm trying to remember.
yes. Yep.
So you hear
Yep.
spirit, and maybe having that part of you heightened through your, I wouldn't call being born premature really a disability, but maybe it created that in you kind of thing. I
It
mean,
might have. Yeah.
there definitely is a correlation between heightened sensitivity and the way our brain interprets things. I think I was telling you all there was I was reading a study that was done using functional magnetic resonance imaging. I want to get that right. That shown psychics and mediums doing their work. They had were scanning them, and the psychic mediums will often exhibit increased activity in specific brain regions during their practices. Um, in particular in the frontal and parietal lobes, which are associated with high level cognitive functions such as attention, decision making, and processing complex sensory input.
Hmm.
And so when we have that part of our brain heightened for complex sensory input, we're able to pick up then we have that heightened sensory awareness in order to pick up our messaging that's coming in through the veil, through the spirits, um, and then having heightened attention too, or more focused attention. I know that when Heather and I teach classes, and you having been a student of it, right, you hear a lot. A
Right.
lot of I believe everybody has the innate ability to has the innate ability for psychic gifts. It's just a matter of working on them and becoming more aware of everything around you. So that attention aspect, right, is part of it. And I just think maybe with certain disabilities, that heightened sensory input is already wired into their brain. It's already part of who they are. So they're able to pick up easier. So maybe they don't have to work as hard at it, is
Hmm.
where I'm going with that idea, you know? Um,
I think
uh,
it's also important, to say in our career as psychic mediums, we have had clients come in and we always steer them to make sure it's not a medical condition,
Hmm.
to go to a eye doctor or go to the doctor and have blood work done and just make sure that your paranormal experiences isn't something medically driven. And the reason why I say that is I can think of a couple of scenarios where we had one client who was having very, very detrimental increased paranormal activity around her, but nobody else was experiencing the terror that she was experiencing. And she was pretty panicked about it. And finally, through the suggestion of saying, why don't you just go make sure you speak to your PCP or to a doctor just to make sure everything's okay within your physical body,
Hmm.
and we can go from there. And it turned out that in this instance that she was severely vitamin and mineral deficient, and it was causing her to have a form of paranormal experiences. Well, as soon as she got her blood panels back and went on to really good vitamins and got her minerals and changed her diet a little bit, those paranormal experiences stopped creating anxiety, and she was able to separate having a paranormal experience versus her own body just totally being depleted, um, which I feel is really important. You need to make sure that it's not a medical condition. I myself, and I know Lisa, we work on both sides of the coin. Obviously, if we're having a heart attack, we're going to the hospital. We're not calling our naturopath. So it's important, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um, I can also think of another time we had a beautiful soul come through Serenity Grove, and she was she was seeing orbs and lights and flashes and lightning bolts, and which sounded a lot
Wow.
like migraines, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
She kept
absolutely.
saying, I'm seeing all these lights and I see all this color, and she didn't need glasses, so we steered her to the eye doctor first, and the eye doctor ended up telling her, there's nothing wrong with you. There's absolutely
Oh,
nothing wrong with you. So then, knowing that there was nothing physically wrong with her eyes, we were able to create a program for her to learn how to use all the colors and lightning and the flashes and everything, that weren't migraines, that weren't a disorder. And she became very successful as a clairvoyant because she could see, maybe not the actual spirits, but she was seeing colors and orbs and all different forms of energy. So it pays to take care of your body, just to make sure that for your own health and wellness, right? Because if you are psychic, if you are a medium, you want to make sure you're doing it in the highest good and the highest possible, for yourself without endangering yourself as well. So I think about those, and there were several other people that have come through, but those two really stood out to me because their curiosity was became piqued, and their compassion was in overdrive to learn how to be psychic, but yet we needed to make sure we dismissed medical.
You know, and you bring up a point, medical diagnosis, sometimes is, you can have some, what you feel are paranormal experiences or psychic experiences, and they're really a scientific condition, a medical condition that is the explanation for it. But you can also have, what you what can happen is you can be misdiagnosed with a medical issue or mental health issue, are having a psychic experience. So it's important to be able to um, investigate for yourself what's happening. Like for example, sleep paralysis, right? We hear a lot about people, oh, I've been, visited by alien or a ghost, sleep
Right.
paralysis is something that naturally happens in sleep. And you feel like you can't move your body.
Right.
You
Right.
can't move any part. You feel like you're being held down. So that particular part of your sleep, you feel like there was you often hear there was a demon holding me down, or
Yes. Yes.
negative or nasty was part of that. And really, it's just sleep paralysis. And if you just give it a beat, that will pass. It had nothing to do with a paranormal experience at all.
Hmm.
Um, Migraines, as Heather mentioned before, do sometimes give the eye the ability to see the aura and flashes and stuff, and so you think you're having a psychic experience when really you're not. I would imagine the pain from a migraine would get the clue that you're having a migraine, but you never know.
Right.
Another sensory processing issue
But
is,
I remember when this young lady was having all the eye issues and she did have a few migraines, she was able to notice the difference between a spiritual um, connection versus an actual migraine. So I
Oh,
think
okay.
there is definitely it shouldn't be dismissed, right?
Mhm.
Nothing medically should be dismissed. It's good to have a baseline, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think it is. And as I was saying, there are certain sensory processing issues that can cause sound or touch sensitivity. And so you think you might be being touched by spirit or hearing spirit, where really it's actual sensory processing issue that you're having, something that has been maybe developmentally delayed or heightened in that way. I think that from my experience as a special ed teacher, as well as running the business with Heather, is the, um, the demographic of autistic people are the ones, and even in the research, and I think you're finding that in research too, Ryan, that autism is a lot um, more closely correlated with psychic experiences than most other disabilities. And I don't know if you want to share some of the research you were finding with, or what you found with that population of people of autism and how that relates to um, psychic gifts or psychic perception.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I found actually a couple books that were written about research done on this. Um And overall, it seems like all these were saying that basically what they found is that, as you're saying, Lisa, like people with autism, because their senses are heightened, that's why they're able to access the psychic abilities more, perhaps. Um, but some of these quotes here that I found that were interesting. Okay, so William Stillman, he is a psychic medium who also has Asperger's syndrome. Uh, and he has written extensively about the psychic gifts of autistic people. He wrote in his book Autism and the God Connection, redefining the autistic experience through extraordinary accounts of spiritual giftedness. He wrote about a mother who told him about her 10-year-old son who has autism, that he could hear her internal monologues and, in many cases, act out the fears that she was mentally expressing. So, for instance, she said that she would be at someone's home, and in her mind, she would think, "Oh, I hope he doesn't pull down the drapes." And then, as soon as she finished that thought, uh, the son would walk over to the drapes and begin to swing on them like Tarzan. And so the mother was, infuriated, nervous, because she's like, how could he know about my fear? How could he know that I was just thinking about that? Um, and then they were also saying that with the son's ability to hear, he was able to hear what others were thinking. So because of that, he became very overwhelmed in crowds. I feel like we've talked about that a few times on this podcast as well. Um, and that she had to help him to learn how to regulate the flow of the information coming through. So found that even just that one quote fascinating. I don't know if anyone has any comments about that.
I'm just, you had shared with me, Heather, some research on William Stillman's research, his belief that autism is part of a human spiritual evolution.
Mm,
And that was a quote from William Stillman that you had there, you know?
Yeah, I think we were all kind of looking on Google and coming up with a lot of the same research, but I think Lisa, Ryan, and myself, we can all kind of agree that many autistic individuals have unusual sensory experiences. It
mm-hmm,
depends on their autism. I really think that a lot of um, autism can blend senses, and so they hear, they see colors, they can taste sounds, they can see letters as colors,
mm-hmm,
which is a lot of synesthesia, right? Like I have seen many individuals get very stressed over the enhanced kind of creativity they have and nobody understands it. So
yes.
yeah, I
Yep.
mean, there's a lot of research out there that shows that a lot of individuals and just regular people who don't realize that maybe they have a form of a little bit of autism in them, that there's a consciousness that they're very aware of that maybe people who do not have special needs don't necessarily become aware of until something really big happens in their life. And I think the synesthesia is huge with autistic people, or anyone that's an individual with some form of handicap.
And that's something that a technique that we use with our students, those that are having difficulty, is say, practice synesthesia, practice, challenging your senses to, see music, not on music written out, but as you're listening to it, what does it look like? And taste a color, if you see a color, what would it taste like? And playing with that blur of sensitivity in your sensories, that could also heighten your psychic awareness. We find that synesthesia is one of those tools that we use often with our students. But
and I think what happens with a lot of individuals with some form of special need, that psychic is the psychic energy is like an amplifies their nervous system. So that's where sometimes you might find the tics, or you might find the Tourette's, or it's like they're like this giant antenna, but because they are not maybe so emotionally evolved, or are too young to understand how to emotionally evolve, that those sensory channels just get all kind of jumbled up, and like their perceiving is so overwhelming that their energy exudes like emotional distress, and people don't quite understand that they're actually having an experience, versus this is just them having a Tourette's or a tic, or right. I mean, this is some of the information that I was reading, where because they can't communicate, you don't know if it's intuition versus the autism or whatever it may be. Their perception is so completely different, and it's neurologically designed differently than ours, right?
yeah, and their language is different too. We've had that with a client called us out for their son who was autistic, and his language, it was what we would term as dolphonic. It sounded like a dolphin, and he was very much more comfortable actually sitting in the bathtub of water. And this is when he'd be most vocal. And we had found that the Tibetan bowls that we had soothed him, those episodes. And so taking in those sounds that weren't even like human speech, but those, sounds, was most soothing for him.
And the didgeridoo, this particular boy loved being able to control his voice through a didgeridoo. And so as he's clanging and ringing and gonging the bells, he's also pushing his voice through a didgeridoo.
Yeah.
And it was a form of expression that we could understand, that he was happy, he was excited, or he was overwhelmed or very nervous. And it took a few minutes for us to kind of interpret his experience that he was having with us as well, you know, that interaction. And then once we learned that this is how he communicated, that those sessions went very well. They went exceptionally well, because we were on his level, and we were able to kind of connect, kind of unseenly touch and touch him, like spiritually. And he felt safe, and he actually was functioning at a high function, which was not normally what he does during the day. So there's a lot of stimuli that happens with the physical sense. And then once you understand how to read that physical sense, it was quite amazing. It was really quite amazing.
Yeah. I want to just indulge me a little bit. I want to go back to William Stillman and some of his research. He was quoted as saying that more children, individuals diagnosed with autism in that 1 year of his research than AIDS, diabetes, and cancer combined, which is a large number. And so he suggests that rise of autism isn't really a random thing, that it's part, as he put it, part of humanity's spiritual evolution. Because autistic individuals will embody typically the traits that mirror higher consciousness, such as honesty, sensitivity, compassion, authenticity, and the lack of social pretense, right? And autistic individuals challenge us to communicate differently, more intuitively and less verbally, as certainly seen by this young boy with his language. And that in itself, he claims, is spiritual growth, to be able to communicate differently, more intuitively, and less verbally. So I am sit here pondering, you know, is that truly spiritual growth? Do we see autistic individuals as being part of that spiritual evolution for humanity? I think that's a big, broad statement to make. I don't know, it's very interesting to ponder and think about. And I was just wondering what your opinions or thoughts were on that.
I wonder if it's perceived as the brain malfunctioning. I don't know. Or is it because of in the United States our food has so many toxins in it that it's changing the frequency? Is it due to medical science with RNA and DNA changes? I mean, there's so many factors that could go into why more and more soul seeds or star seeds, or I think I saw a few other, quote unquote names out there for these people where, you know, they're so heightened and they're tuned differently than children of the 60s, children of the 70s, children of the 80s, children of the 90s. There's a big difference. So I think there's a connection. I really do. I think he's spot on with, we just got to figure out where that connection comes in, right?
So with these children who are artistic that show that telepathic, that empathic, or even the ability to communicate with animals very well, those gifts, is that the next step to human awareness, do you think, as he puts it in his research?
Yeah.
I could see that.
I mean, when you think about neuroplasticity, right? We're training the neurons of the brain to perceive your world differently, or perceive yourself differently, or to help enact changes within the body, in your environment. Perhaps autistic individuals, wherever they are on the spectrum, some of that neuroplasticity is easier to do in the brain. I don't know if it's a brain malfunction as much as maybe it's a brain enhancement.
Hmm.
It seems that William Stillman's research would suggest that it's more of an enhancement. Is how I look at it, right? At least his opinion of it. What do you think, Ryan? What do you? You're sitting there going,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah. Yeah, no, I've been listening, and yeah, I agree that it's I think it's an enhancement, and also just seeing it as it is like an evolution for everyone else too, to be able to, learn to communicate better, learn, maybe different ways to access different abilities as well. I think it's just a learning experience for all and helping us evolve.
Perhaps autistic individual, their issue more isn't necessarily their autism, but more the way the society looks at autism. As
I'd
far
be interested in seeing how they're, I mean, working with the special needs community, you can clearly see that, they're medicated. So how does the medication also alter these individuals with the different
True.
disabilities that are out there? Not just autism, right? Like there's
Right.
all sorts of other Asperger's and, you many other different technical. How does that medicine tune them differently? And does that cause like an internal kind of muckery up there in the brain because they're medicated, but their sole source is trying to shine forward? And how do you teach somebody, in an individual, to balance that between spiritual and the physical too? That's been crossing my mind like the whole time we've been doing research, is like, what are these medicines doing to
Right.
correct, whatever it may be? Because
Yeah.
it's perfectly natural to practice synesthesia. It's perfectly natural to experience our world the way our neurons fire and collect and gather. So it's very fascinating. Um, but then comes ridicule right behind all that too. Like I know the three of us have seen so many identified somebody individual was some form of something, and they're ridiculed, or they're not understood, and so there's a lot of fear around this community as well, which shuts out a lot of this too, right? So it's quite interesting.
And I
Yeah.
wonder, Heather, you're bringing up a good point about the medication too. I wonder if the medication might dull some of the senses, or it's like, I don't know, one of those things where it's like you're trying to help something, but yet in return it's dulling something else, and so, or maybe does it help streamline it better? If I don't know, that's something to think
Yeah,
about.
I mean, I harken back to teaching Reiki. For every action, there's a reaction. This is something I say a lot in the Reiki 1 classes because it's the truth. For every action, there's a reaction. So for dulling some form of sensory that's deemed not spiritual, but but it actually is spiritual. How do you teach someone that may have a learning disability to do that balancing act? Because I truly believe that they are tuned differently. I mean, working with that, individuals, you see how many different, how different everyone's tuned in. So and sometimes you can get them to share their experiences, and some of them have just such fear of being ridiculed, or such fear of even admitting that they're having those experiences, because they're already labeled by a definition of their whatever's wrong with them. So it really kind of makes me think, like, are we doing the best for that community? Because obviously spiritualism is not a huge forefront, so you don't have many doctors coming in and saying, oh well, you have autism, but this is, your autism makes you, I don't know, clairvoyant or clairaudient, right? Or whatever. So it's kind of makes the wheels turn. Can everybody smell the smoke?
I think, the things that are scientific, it's every fact and evidence-based, right? Evidence-based research is what drives science. And so it can explain how, and maybe not always the why when it comes to the spirituality part of it, right? Being a middle brain person, and as scientific as I am, the creative individual, the psychic individual, there becomes that leap of faith that happens, or a leap of trust, if you want to call it something like that. I found it interesting. Heather shared with me some of her research, and I melded it with some of my own. And one thing that I found in both was the idea of the it's called predictive coding theory. Have you heard of that?
Hmm.
And the predictive coding theory, it says that our brains are always predicting what will happen next. It's always in that kind of mode. And if you think about the higher level learning of the brain, um, and we teach it as spiritually as the chakras and how they develop, and the spiritual chakras being the throat, the third eye, and the crown. That higher level of thinking is where that begins, and we start to create, patterns and pattern thinking, which is there to predict what might happen next, which is why when you see something red on the stove, a burner that's red, it's hot, so not to touch it, because you predict that if you touch it, it will be hot, right? Our brains are always thinking in this predictive coding theory, right? Always trying to predict what's going to happen next. But for autistic individuals, those models that filter that sensory input are not as efficient, meaning that every sound, light, sensation can be very raw, unfiltered, can be overwhelming, which is why you can have autistic people that get so overwhelmed with sensory input. And that heightened awareness, not just to noise or textures, but consider the possibility that it's also a heightened awareness that they're picking up emotional or energetic frequencies that we might otherwise miss because we don't have that heightened awareness, right? So if you can consider that, if that heightened sensory sensitivity, maybe it's not a malfunction when it comes to psychic gifts. Maybe it's more of an amplification of it, correct? And then that mechanism that causes that overload could then open those channels for deeper perception, to seeing and feeling what is beyond our actual eye. And
But I have also seen that sensory processing can be very difficult for someone with a form of a disability, because the people who help take care of somebody that's an individual makes it sound like it's a hallucination too. Are they hallucinating, or are they actually having a perceived spiritual experience? And then it becomes a control thing. Like, how do you help an adult with autism that can see anomalies, but the person that takes care of them thinks they're hallucinating? So
Oh,
there's that concern as well of, like, is their experience creating greater distress, or do you get to the right people so that you can put that hallucination into the right energetic context too?
I found that exactly, right? How do we do that? So I found it very interesting when we go back to our topic of disabilities and psychic awareness. Is there a connection there, right? When I think about the predictive coding theory and the theory that perhaps autistic individuals are getting more information than we would normally pick up, right? Because of their heightened sensitivity, which allows them to be more psychic, as you could say, or get that deeper connection. I go back to research that was done. There was a study that was in the Journal of Consciousness Studies that showed that mediums showed significant different brainwave patterns when in a trance or during communication with what they identify as, there's spirit. Um, and it shows that, and then there wasn't part of that research was EEG studies that revealed, which is, I never say this right, electroencephalogram, EEG. Revealed that psychic mediums will display enhanced connectivity in the
yes.
synchronization between different brain regions. So our ability to take that heightened awareness and make sense of it and channel it out in a more acceptable way is what's happening within our brain, whereas someone with autism might not have that capability to make that synchronization leap or a connection, is what I'm thinking. So they are, to me, they are having these spiritual experiences with perhaps a lack of ability to communicate it effectively because we don't know how to communicate very well, right? When it comes to interacting with certain autistic populations as a society. I just found that really kind of interesting. And I try to make that connection for myself between scientific study and, a theory, which isn't really proven yet. I don't know, I found it fascinating.
Yeah, and you're bringing up a good point too about, using the different parts of the brain. I remember, I forgot which psychic did it on TV actually, but they showed, I forgot who it was, but whoever it was, it's been a long time ago, I guess. They showed like an actual brain scan while the psychic was like tapping into abilities, and you could see it light up like on both sides of the brain and how it was just all working together. So, yeah, you're bringing up a good point about all that.
Yeah.
It's quite
There was
fascinating.
actually an Ancient Aliens episode where this gentleman was after I think it's been a long time since I've seen the episode. It's one in the earlier tapings of Ancient Aliens, where this gentleman was had some form of something happen to him, and he became this extreme electrical channel where whatever he thought of and he put his energy into, he could fix it. And they also put him on a machine where he could actually move dials, like he was moving the energy back and forth just by the thought process. So
Wow.
that, like, where does that fit in? Like, it's just so um everybody has their own superpower, I guess, right, Ryan and Lisa? Like,
That's
everybody
true.
kind of has their own kind of field of their perspective and of how they view the world. And I guess the theory is always true, right? You don't know what someone is visualizing or feeling or seeing or hearing or knowing until you walk in their shoes, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
A
That's true.
little nod to the other podcast that Ryan's involved in, Walking in Their Shoes. Yep.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yep.
I found in trying to make connections for myself, I found the concept of neuroplasticity, which I brought up before, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself, forming new neural connections. To me, that's another key factor for us as psychic mediums, because we have brains that are particularly adept at doing that neuroplastic change, um, to refine our abilities over time so that we can perceive, right? And have an enhanced sensory processing capability, perceive spirit. Well, that enhanced sensory processing capability is already found in highly sensitive persons, such as autistic individuals. Um, so it stands to reason then that that connection between at least autistic individuals that or a highly sensitive person, I think, has a natural connection then to be able to connect with spirit. Whether they can communicate that effectively to society or not, I think it's there naturally. Whereas, going back to that initial belief that Heather and I have that everybody has this innate ability, some people are just farther along the road than others. It's just like, you sing and play guitar. I might be able to sing, but I can't play guitar. I can't sing as well as you either. So, um, along
Yes,
those
you can.
I can sing pretty good actually, but anyway, um, but I can't play guitar. So along that musical road, right? You're farther along than I might be.
Hmm.
But I learn how to play guitar? Probably, if I put my attention to it and more aware of, different things, absolutely, kind of thing. So it's just a matter, anybody can, I guess, learn to recognize and use their gifts. Just some people are already there, and whether they can communicate or not. And that's kind of where I stand as a connection between at least highly sensitive persons, such as autistic, and disabilities and psychic gifts. That's just kind of where I ended up and sat with it, you know?
Ryan, did music come natural for you? Did playing the guitar or singing just kind of come so natural that you just do it? Or is it something you just really was interested in and then it became a hobby? How did that work for you?
Um, in all honesty, ever since I was a little kid, I was always singing, always wanting to just, have a rhythm. And there's a photo of when I was like maybe 2 years old going up to my grandfather's guitar and like touching it, like wanting to play it and just being fascinated by it, drawn towards it. But yeah, I did try playing and everything before taking lessons. However, I had to take lessons in order to learn how to enhance that ability. So going back to, what Lisa's saying as well, yeah, I mean, and related to music, um, yes, I felt like I had it within me, but I had to take lessons to hone that in. So, and to like, develop it further.
And yet there are people who at the age of 4 are playing, masterpieces on a piano.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes, it's
So if
incredible.
you kind of maybe make that metaphorical like analogy between the two,
Hmm.
I don't know. I just um, that's where I ended up standing. I know that you had mentioned you read a couple books, or you had identified a couple books. Do you want to share the titles and the authors, and maybe we can share that in our social media? You
Yep.
know,
Absolutely. Let's see. So the first one that, well, we both touched upon, William Stillman. He wrote a book called Autism and the God Connection: Redefining the Autistic Experience Through Extraordinary Accounts of Spiritual Giftedness. There's another author, she's autistic as well, which I found that interesting too. William Stillman, going back to him, he's a psychic medium who also has Asperger's syndrome, so he's on the spectrum of autism. Then there's autistic author Donna Williams. Interesting that they both have Williams in their names. Anyway, so she wrote about, in her autobiography, Nobody Nowhere, she wrote about some of her childhood telepathic experiences where she saw what other students at school were doing. It's kind of like she was just having daydreams and watching fellow students that she knew, she would see them like, making a sandwich or going to bed or just like random things. And she said it wasn't anything that she could control. It just came to her that she knew what was going on without seeing them face to face, but she just got the images. So clairvoyant. But they're calling it telepathic in this sense. And then lastly, the last author that I found here was Dr. Diane Powell, wrote in her book, The ESP Enigma, The Scientific Case for Psychic Phenomenon. And it's about people with autism having ESP. And she did quite a study on a student who, well, I'm saying student, that's the former teacher in me, on a child who is a nonverbal child with autism. The child was sitting next to a therapist. Across the room, the child's mother was showing, lifting up cards off a table, showing an image on it. For instance, it was like an image of a triangle. They were showing it to the camera, but not to the child. The therapist was holding up like the iPad device for the child to spell out what was on the card, and the child was able to correctly tap out triangle. And they repeated that um, study or that what do I want to say that mm, research over and over again. So
I know Carolyn Corey. You can find her on YouTube and Amazon, and if somebody subscribes to the Gaia channel, she has a lot of episodes about how individuals can create different energies, whether it's synesthesia and moving energy. She did one study where the children were sitting on the couch and she was reading the book, but she wasn't reading it out loud. But the children, it was a brand new book, didn't have any concept of this book, was able to read it to her without even seeing it. So there are some really great videos out there to which I think we should all really explore and
mm,
continue this topic, because I think we've barely scraped a surface here today. Right. But definitely would love to invite the audience participation here and see if anybody has um, a story to share where they have experienced this, even though they've never been diagnosed with an autistic or some form of handicap, or however it's professionally to say it. I'm not really quite sure. But I would love to hear their experiences for future episodes. I
Yeah,
think it's important for us to spread that, right? Talk about this.
absolutely, absolutely. I have a couple resources and books too, if people are interested in the concept of neuroplasticity and rewiring the brain. One is called Wired Healing by Annie Hopper, and it's just about her method to rewire your brain to overcome certain chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia and things like that. And then, of course, I think it would be hard not to mention Joe Dispenza when we talk about neuroplasticity. Joe Dispenza has quite a few books that he wrote. I own the book Supernatural, um, but and it's basically how everyday people can become supernatural by using certain methods of neuroplasticity. And he also has other books such as You Are the Placebo and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself or Evolve Your Brain. He himself used the process of neuroplasticity to heal himself. And I always find it very authentic when authors write about their own experiences. And that's the impetus, to creating the book, right? So those two I would recommend as well. And we could put up all of these that Ryan, Heather, and myself has mentioned. We'll put up links or pictures of the books or whatever in social media when it's after this airs. So that would be great. And yeah, we should definitely continue this topic and delve even further into this idea. No
great.
affirmation, so we'll just say,
I have I have an affirmation.
all
I
right, do
think,
it.
yeah, my sensitivity is beautiful and my feelings and emotions are valid.
Perfect.
There
Let's
you
just
go.
take that for all three of us then, okay? That's
Absolutely.
amazing. All right, so until next week, we look forward to connecting with you then.
Thank you for tuning in to Ready to Connect. If you're interested in exclusive behind-the-scenes content, be sure to like, share, and follow us on social media by searching for Ready to Connect Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And for those looking to further support our podcast, consider subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/readytoconnectpodcast. And until next time, get ready to connect.